So I'm Jeff Carter, serve as president at Bethany Theological Seminary, and I am delighted to be talking to the academic dean, Steve Schweitzer, Dr. Steve Schweitzer, in another conversation with the president. And so, Steve, welcome.
Good to see you, Jeff.
So I want to share a little bit about you, and I'm going to use your biographical sketch that's found on the website because it's a bit of a narrative, and then
Yep.
obviously share a few of your academic achievements. But I love how this is written. You say I've had a eclectic spiritual journey on my way to becoming brethren. I was born into an observant Catholic family. My parents joined the Assembly of God when I was in the eighth grade. Through high
Mhm.
school and college, I remained an active member of the Assemblies of God. And I'd say you were really good on those Bible quizzes. We've
Yep.
talked about that.
Yes.
So after college, Jill, your wife, you were married and you attended a Pentecostal non-denominational church in St. Paul for five
Mhm.
years. In 2000, you moved to South Bend, Indiana, and began attending the Prince of Peace Church of the Brethren. And during that time, your three kids were born. You
Mhm.
completed your degree at Notre Dame. That was your PhD. And
Yep.
then you went to work for AMBS, the Associated Mennonite Biblical Seminary, now the Anabaptist
Mhm.
Mennonite Biblical Seminary in Elkhart. And you were 3 years there as an assistant professor in Old Testament, and then came to Bethany. And you're in your 18th year, which is
Yes.
just fantastic. So you talk about that eclectic background. You have your PhD, Notre Dame. You are Old Testament scholar with a specialty in Chronicles. And I
Mhm.
love, I asked you once, why Chronicles? And you're like, for a PhD, you want to write on a subject that no one else has written on,
Yep.
and that just catapults you to the top, which it has for you. You are a noted scholar on
Mm.
Chronicles. You also went to the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul and North Central University in Minneapolis with your BA. Steve, I love your eclectic background.
Mhm.
You have not, you're a guy that likes straight lines, right? Whether it's
Yep.
accreditation or planning, and yet your spiritual journey has kind of ebbed and flowed in different traditions. And you bring all of that to a seminary that is at the moment growing, particularly among our ecumenical students. And so
Yes.
you match well your work and our focus. So in thinking about that broad story,
Mhm.
um, go ahead and tell us what initially got you interested in academic career, and who were some of the teachers, mentors, and
Mhm.
scholars who were important to you in your early years.
Yeah, so scripture has always been important to me, central role. I mean, you mentioned the Bible quiz piece growing up, and so that's a huge part of my faith journey is the centrality of scripture, which is also one of the reasons why the Church of the Brethren is so appealing to me. I went to a small Christian liberal arts college for my undergraduate education and did an interdisciplinary degree there that combined biblical studies and cultural studies. And I just really found that taking, courses in Hebrew Bible, New Testament, biblical languages, that really energized me. And then in my sophomore year, I was taking this advanced seminar on the minor prophets and just fell in love with the minor prophets and with the academic study of scripture. I mean, that particular course opened up a whole new way of thinking about the Bible. Focused a lot on historical context, literary context, and what was then called, social location methods, um, approaches to scripture, and just began to think like I could really see myself doing this. This is really energizing, really passionate about that. And then after that, that professor that I had for that, Glenn Menzies, he asked me to be his teaching assistant then the following year. I would continue being a teaching assistant for him for several semesters and ran some Hebrew language labs, got to guest lecture. We had conversations about pedagogy, syllabus construction, choosing textbooks, stuff like that during that time. And it was just a really great opportunity for me to sort of test out, can we do this? Is this something that I could see myself doing? I had other professors then took multiple courses that took like everything in the catalog in scripture and just really was challenged by those professors to think uh, intentionally and creatively, theologically about Scripture and what it means to blend a life of faith and a life of the mind together, and then continued to work out of that Minor Prophets course. My final paper for that class was on Zechariah, and that would eventually become my master's thesis, which then eventually was a published essay. And so just going all the way back to this initial start and to see like an academic product come out of it is just really satisfying to me. And so in those early years, it was really the professors at that school that really shaped my thinking around a lot of this. I read extensively, but just really that experience of the academic study of scripture was just so core to who I am.
Now, if my memory serves me correct, you studied with Vanderkam.
That's correct. Yeah, Jim Vanderkam was my dissertation director at Notre Dame, and took classes with him. Exceptional scholar, Dead Sea Scrolls guy, and just a great human being. And so, we would work closely together on my dissertation work. He asked great questions, helping me clarify my thinking. I had a really wonderful committee of folks there at Notre Dame. Greg Sterling, who's now the dean at Yale, he was on the committee. Hindi Nyman, Jewish scholar who does a lot of stuff with thinking about how traditions develop over time. Gene Ulrich, who's also a Dead Sea Scrolls guy. So my committee was pretty intense in terms of working through a dissertation on Chronicles. Yep.
So if we were at an Old Testament conference and
Hmm.
someone said Vanderkam and the Dead Sea Scrolls, everyone would just shake their head because they know
Oh
what
yeah,
that means.
yeah.
So in
World
kind of
renowned.
in layperson's terms, why the connection with Vanderkam and the Dead Sea Scrolls? What are those? What does that name and that subject mean?
So, I mean, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1948, and they are the earliest known witness to the Hebrew text of the Old Testament. So, it pushed back our knowledge 1,000 years of what the Hebrew text looked like. It also confirmed that a lot of the readings in the Greek version were actually based on Hebrew text and not being made up by Greek translators, that they were actually translating from an alternate text. All of the books of the Hebrew Bible, except for Nehemiah and Esther, are present in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this is a huge win for biblical studies scholarship. Vanderkam was on the committee, one of the many international scholars on the committee to actually translate sections of the Dead Sea Scrolls and to have the official version. And so yeah, so it was just, and he's written extensively on various pieces of Dead Sea Scrolls work and why it matters for understanding early Christianity, how it shapes our understanding of Judaism at the time of Jesus. Um, I mean, Gene Ulrich, similar kind of guy, very textual oriented critic. I remember in his Isaiah seminar, we would just sit there and translate every week from the scroll. Like you would be reading the unpointed scroll in class. And that was the assumption was you would begin with this unpointed, no vowels text to translate. And it was just an exceptional time to be at Notre Dame when they were working through all those translation work, which is all now done. I mean, the scrolls have been fully translated, which is great.
I love how you say the unpointed. I would say the text without dots, right? I mean
Yes,
the difference in
right.
the vowels.
Yep.
But yeah, so I mean being able to study with just folks at the top of their game
Hmm.
and to have access, which is great. Now, so that's fairly typical to be able to, especially at Notre Dame.
Yep.
But you've not really followed the typical path as an academic dean, maybe as a scholar, but not as an academic dean.
Right.
Typically, you transition into this role later in someone's career. You were early,
Hmm.
pretty early and young as a dean. What drew you to academic administration, and what do you like best in this role as an academic dean?
Right. So, as you mentioned, I started teaching at Associated, now Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary in Elkhart. I was there for 3 years, teaching a variety of Old Testament texts, including Hebrew language and things like that. And I was happy. I assumed that I would be doing that, for a while. Like that was my career path. I had worked with the dean there on pieces related to their self-study accreditation process. I wrote some key parts of that work and could see myself doing that kind of work early on as a faculty member. And I took on a couple administrative tasks. And I think, if I had stayed there, the plan was that I would be the next MA director. Like that was sort of the next logical step. When the current MA director was going to retire, I was kind of in line to take that over. Um, and I think, I have organizational gifts, attention to detail. I like to think structurally. You mentioned the linear part, and to create a plan and to work it, right? And so to see how you want to get there and do the thing. And so those are in my skill set. But in the fall of 2008, Ruth Ann Johansson, who was then president of the seminary, we interacted and we had a couple conversations, and she made me aware of Bethany's open academic dean position and was wondering if I was interested in that. And so we talked a bit. My wife and I, Jill, we talked and we prayed and decided I would give this a try. Like I think I could do this. And part of the appeal was this is the denominational seminary, right? This is the Church of the Brethren Seminary, and we had become brethren in 2000. And this was almost a decade later, and really felt like this was an opportunity to give back and to work intentionally with the denomination that meant a lot to us. And so it was a little bit of a surprise when I was called as dean. I thought surely there are other people who have more experience and those kind of things, but it's been a good fit. I think it's a good fit for my gifts. I think Bethany, it's been good for me, and I hope I've been good for Bethany these 18 years, and just really enjoy doing the work. And you ask what I enjoy most about it. I mean, so in my role as dean, I get to work with faculty on curriculum, helping to shape what Bethany offers. And I think that plays a vital role in meeting students' needs and also preparing them for vocations, that matter. And so that is really satisfying to me to think about where students are maneuvering through and how can we support them and what the options are. I do like a straight line, but I also like flexibility. I mean, my all three of my degrees were interdisciplinary and quite flexible. And so I enjoy a curriculum that allows students to follow their passions. And I think that we've done a really good job of that here at Bethany. And so there's a really satisfying piece to that. People joke around here that I love a good grid. And I do. But I also like to think about what's possible within the constraints of a grid, right? What the options are, and how to work at both requirements and flexibility. And so figuring out that puzzle, right? It's a puzzle of curriculum development, course scheduling, all of that is incredibly rewarding to me. And, our program expansion over the last, I don't know, decade, has certainly been particularly satisfying. And I think it's contributed directly to the enrollment growth and the student success that we've seen. And so as dean, I get to smile because, it's worked. And I think for me, that's really satisfying to see others succeeding in the system that we've put in place.
So part of everything that happens at the seminary and the dean is telling the story. And so every 10
Hmm.
years we have accreditors. For us, the ATS, Association of Theological Schools, and the Higher Learning Commission, two separate groups come and they kind of look under the hood, check the
Mm.
books, make sure we're doing everything that we're supposed to be doing. And you said early on at AMBS you were part of the accreditation process. Now, this is one of your key responsibilities is leading us through this process, a task that many may find daunting, uh, but you're one of those rare individuals that actually greets us with enthusiasm and joy and kind of loves it. And
Yeah.
you've told us many times, this is just great. So, for those who are unfamiliar, can you just talk a little bit about the process and why accreditation is important?
Right. So Bethany carries two accreditation statuses. The first is with the Association of Theological Schools, which is like specialized accrediting for seminaries in the US and Canada. And then the second is with the Higher Learning Commission, which is the US Department of Education body that we're connected to and provides accrediting affirmation for schools of all types. And so accreditation is a mark of quality, that it demonstrates that an institution has sort of met standard criteria or accountability pieces, and that we're doing best practices in line with other schools, and that there's expectations for accountability. So if you're accredited by HLC or by ATS, you know that anyone who's accredited by those institutions is held accountable to a similar set of standards, regardless of size, location, whether they're Christian or whether they're a state organization. There's just an expectation of all schools are doing these things across the board. It allows for things like transfer credits in terms of a very functional piece. So if you want to transfer schools, you can rest assured that there's a quality of education behind that. And then just also this sense of quality, so that no matter where you're at, there's this level of recognition that schools are being held accountable in the same way. And so whether you're graduating, from Harvard or from Princeton or Notre Dame or Bethany, there's a commonality there across the board when it comes to accreditation. And so that external check on are you doing the things you say you're doing is really important. For a lot of students then who want to go on for a PhD program, if you want to continue on for a PhD or a DMin, you're going to want to go to an accredited school so that your credits count and um, your diploma is recognized and all those things. And so for us, as we want to send on students to be getting even additional higher ed, like that's an essential piece of it too. So there's sort of the quality mark, and then there's the carrying on for additional work. As far as the process itself, uh, so Bethany writes a lengthy report. Ours is for ATS is 140 something pages long right now, with lots of supporting documentation and data demonstrating how we have met the standards that are established for accredited schools. The report covers all aspects of the institution. So, curriculum, faculty, governance, student services, enrollment pieces, finances, the board, uh, technology, the library, everything is accounted for across the institution. So it really touches the whole school, and everyone contributes. And so, what we do is we have committees that write pieces, and then those pieces then come in to me. I'm the editor, and I put them all together, try to make them make one voice, make it make sense, gather up all the data to support our claim that we are doing what it is we say we're doing. And then there's an external peer review team that will come in from other schools to look, as you said, under the hood, and to ask questions and to interview folks and to see if the documentation matches the reality, which hopefully it does, and that we are working at the things that we say we're doing. Now, we're not perfect, but we do a lot of things well. And we do a lot of things up to a really high standard. And for me, it's being able to tell the story in ways that are honest, in ways that are celebratory. I mean, you want to celebrate your successes. And also then it helps the school to get on the same page when it comes to mission and direction, right? So as you're putting all this together, you're saying, where have we come from? Where are we? And where do we want to go? And that's really exciting for me because I like to think about that continuity between present, past, and future, right? And to have the whole institution participate in that process and to share that common story, I think is really valuable from a sense of what it means to do this work together. So I find it highly energizing, which is not always the case. I mean, it's a lot of work, but it's highly energizing, and it's a great time to celebrate again what it is that we're doing well and where we want to go next, knowing that there's always more work to do.
So two things on that. One is it kind of follows the Hebrew scripture, right?
Oh yeah.
Honoring the past, knowing the present, looking
Mhm.
forward to the future. And so that makes perfect sense, that framing. So if you were to pull out two or three things in this accreditation report that you would be like, Bethany, this is just something to celebrate and is fantastic. What would you name?
I mean, I would say obviously right now so many seminaries are struggling financially, enrollment, just across the board. And we're not, right? So we are on solid financial ground. We have great stability. We just completed the campaign, raising over 13 million. I think this is great, right? So the financial stability is a real marker of success. Alongside of that, you have the enrollment. I mean, 10 years ago, we were half as big. We've doubled our enrollment over the last 10 years. And that has come through a variety of factors, telling the story differently, being more creative when it comes to educational programming. I mean, our programming has expanded, as you know, from 2 degrees in a certificate to 5 degrees and 9 certificates. Like without that program expansion, there's no way that we would be able to have the enrollment growth we've had. The affordability piece, looking to leave Title IV funding soon, the new Brethren scholarship, like all these things did not happen overnight. They happened over the course of a 10 plus year period in which we've been working at these things. And now it's sort of all gelling and coming together right at the same time. It's really exciting and really satisfying to see the success in so many areas. So I think this combination of creativity and innovation, being willing to take risks. And Jeff, I think one of the things that you've brought in particular is a spirit of generosity. I mean, that mindset has changed the way we do things. And we are in a much better place now than we were 10 years ago when it comes to program, finances, and students. And that is so exciting to be at a moment at a school that is doing so many things well when so many of our peers are really struggling.
That's great. Yeah, obviously you've read the report.
Yeah,
You
more
just
than
passed
once.
you just passed the test. Well done.
Mhm.
No, it's just great, and to be able to say, these are the things that we're doing well, and we know we have growing edges,
Yeah, of course.
but
Everybody does.
there's real strength. So
Mhm.
accreditation and Hebrew scripture, those are not your only passions,
Right.
right? You love science fiction and theology, and in fact, at a recent conference, just overwhelming interest and support for one of your
Mhm.
presentations, and it's something you're kind of known for. So, tell me, how did you first get interested in science fiction, and how did it then creep into and become, I would say, a core piece of your scholarship?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm a lifelong sci-fi fan. I mean, I grew up with Star Wars, watching that all the time. I watched Star Trek reruns, on Saturday mornings and things like that. Just really, really grew up surrounded by science fiction. So my interest in the genre was from a very early age, right? As a kid growing up. And then I have this interest in sort of comparative mythology and cultural studies in my background. And so there's a lot of connection with science fiction there. And I would say I've been thinking about science fiction through a theological lens at least since high school and definitely during college. So a story I don't share a whole lot is I had a class in college that was Principles of Christian Education. And we had to do a variety of types of teaching. And so one of the things that you could do was to use film or media or something and show something. And then you had to couple that with a second style. So we showed the end of Return of the Jedi, where Vader redeems himself. And then my roommate and I acted out the fight scene between Vader and Luke Skywalker. And and that professor was really encouraging to think like, obviously it's very simple, right? But thinking through what that means, he would use Star Trek clips often on VHS tape in class, right? And so being able to ask theological questions about science fiction at an early college age was something that you wouldn't have guessed, right? But that's part of my background. And then when I was working on my dissertation on Chronicles of all things, I ended up reading a lot of science fiction theory because I was working on utopian perspectives of Chronicles. So that's sort of my thing is how to read Chronicles as it's creating a better alternative reality. And utopian studies and science fiction studies overlap in terms of literary genre. And so I ended up reading all this science fiction theory while I was working on my dissertation on Chronicles. And so as I then was thinking about adding a new course to my offering here at Bethany, um, I was teaching Chronicles and I was doing some other stuff, but I needed to add something else. And so brought to the faculty the idea of creating a course on science fiction and theology and there was strong affirmation from the faculty, and so I did. So I pursued creating such a course. And at the time, we had a faculty member who was teaching a course on theopoetics, and there was a couple other sort of theology and culture type courses, and so it fit nicely into this package. That then would later become our certificate in theopoetics and theological imagination, and then the full MATW, Master of Arts Theopoetics and Writing. And so what looked like sort of this niche kind of little, oddity within the curriculum actually finds itself in several different programs, and I think opens up a wider conversation about how we think theologically about the culture around us, and how to think expansively and to ask questions that we normally wouldn't ask. And so that certainly was something that was a risk, right, to add such a course at that particular point in time. And that course has now been offered multiple times over the years and has taken different shapes. And as you mentioned, my scholarship. So in 2023, I was able to publish an essay on the utopian city in a collection of essays called the Biblical Themes in Science Fiction. And each author was sort of to trace a theme in scripture and then a theme across sci-fi and then an extended example in sci-fi. And so, I traced the depiction of the city in scripture across sci-fi, and then my extended example was the city of Zion in the Matrix trilogy. And that essay now, I mean, that directly grew out of my teaching, right? So that particular essay is linked directly to that particular course, and I continue to work actively in the area of science fiction and theology. So,
Which it's not niche. I mean, you it's part of a larger study
right.
in figures of Joseph Campbell and others
Mhm.
written, and so it's a continuation, which I think is really important. When you talk about your studies connected to your teaching, you've got to talk about Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah.
Mhm.
So, what got you interested in those, other than my comment about no one writes on Chronicles and you wanted to? Is
Right.
actually deeper than that. So
Yes, it
so
is.
why is your interest on Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah?
Right. So my research interest in the Hebrew Bible has largely been in the Second Temple period. So the time after the return from exile, Babylon, they rebuild the temple, and then from that period, then through the time of Jesus. Like that was my focus. So whether it was post-exilic prophecy or wisdom literature or the Dead Sea Scrolls, like those things have always been of interest to me, like ever since that Minor Prophets class. And so when I started at Notre Dame, I assumed that I would be working on something like, Second Temple period, Dead Sea Scrolls, maybe continue my work in apocalyptic literature, which draws on the Zechariah piece. Um, but then my very first semester at Notre Dame, I had this course where we looked at Mosaic authority in the Second Temple period. So how other texts use the figure of Moses to sort of make their claims, right? And so we read a whole bunch of stuff. And the Book of Chronicles does some really interesting things with the figure of Moses and some interesting things with other claims to authority. And so Chronicles, if you haven't read it lately, it begins with genealogies, 9 beautiful chapters of genealogies, and it ends with the Edict of Cyrus. And so while the story is about the first temple period, it's written in the second temple period. And it's talking about how to bridge sort of the past to the present and into the future. And so this text, Chronicles, comes from a period of time that I supposedly wanted to be an expert in. And so I'm like, I don't know anything about this book. And if I'm going to claim to be a Second Temple person, I should at least figure out how Chronicles fits into the spread of things. And so I saw an opportunity to learn something new about Chronicles and a time period that I wanted to be an expert in. And so I worked on this paper for that class around Mosaic authority and other issues of authority in Chronicles, and realized that I think I had something to say, like that I was really interested in this and there was more stuff to talk about. And the faculty member who was teaching that seminar, she really liked it. Hindi Nyman, she ended up being on my committee, and she thought it had potential to continue to be worked on, maybe grow into an essay, maybe even become something bigger. And it ended up being something bigger, my dissertation. And so she encouraged me to submit it to the Society of Biblical Literature, Chronicles Ezra Nehemiah unit. And so I did to read it as a paper at a conference, and it was accepted. So I gave the paper, and it was affirmed as like, you should work on this. Like, you've got, like, this is interesting. You should do something here. And so as I continued then to work on Chronicles and read a lot, I became convinced that there's more here than people tend to pay attention to. If we think differently, if we change our assumptions about what the text is doing, we can have a really rich theological conversation about a text that often gets asked only questions of historicity. And so to think theologically about this and how it fits within the canon, how it thinks differently about what Israel should be doing at the time, and then how that leads on into the time of Jesus. Like, all that was really interesting to me. And so this one single, hey, I should know something more about this, led into this whole thing for me, and just kept going deeper and deeper in that. And then with Ezra and Nehemiah, if you end up working on Chronicles, you end up getting sucked into Ezra and Nehemiah and vice versa because it's the same time period, and these two texts end up interacting with one another, often with sort of different theological viewpoints and ways that they want the community to go. So you have two texts, Chronicles and Ezra and Nehemiah, that are sort of engaged in this, I don't know, debate, conversation, discussion about what it means to be faithful. And so thinking theologically about how to bring those texts together is really interesting to me, as today the church wrestles with this question about what it means to be faithful. And so we have here a biblical example of that ongoing dialogue. And so for me, how these texts that are written in such a crucial period of time are wrestling with the past, living in the present while trying to shape the future, again, that story is really essential to me. And I have just fallen in love with these books and the ways in which they try to encourage faithfulness in the midst of a lot of crisis and a lot of chaos.
So today, what are you reading and writing? I mean, it's a lot about your works and passions. So what are you reading and writing today?
So I'm trying to finish up some writing projects. The accreditation stuff has certainly taken my attention recently, as that's coming quickly for us. But I'm working on a revised article for reading Utopia and Deuteronomy. So I have something there to finish up, and then also something on Chronicles in Utopia, specifically on the reigns of the kings Jotham through Josiah. So those are sort of the two. I gotta polish those up, get those out, hopefully this fall, and be done with it. Soon as those two are done, then I've got an essay that I've committed to write on the figure of Hezekiah in Chronicles for a collection of essays. And so that particular king is very meaningful to me. My favorite chapter in all of it is Second Chronicles 30, which is Hezekiah's Passover. And so being able to write an essay just on this king will be greatly satisfying. So that's next. And then following that, I've committed to write an essay on how Ezra Nehemiah uses scripture. And so those will be the next sort of writing projects. As far as reading, my reading right now is tied largely to my teaching. So I'm teaching a new class this fall, Voices of Peace in the Hebrew Bible, brand new course. And that fits in with a couple of different programs, but particularly with our Nigerian students. And so it's not anything new, but I'm rereading David Leiter's book, Neglected Voices, Peace in the Old Testament, which we'll be using as a textbook in there. And so spending some time with that one. And then this book here, Rise Up, O Judge, Study of Justice in the Biblical World, which is by Enrique Nardoni. And one of the interesting things about this is it's translated from Spanish. And so it's not a typical kind of, Western approach to this, and covers all the canon, which is great. So that's more of a rereading for me, and those are assigned textbooks. I'm always on the lookout for new science fiction stuff that actually is extensively published right now, asking these questions around sci-fi. And so in my spare time, I've just started reading two things. First is Star Trek Utopia. So the answer is obviously yes. The question is how. And so looking forward to reading all through that. And that's it's a very interesting text. It's written by a German film studies professor. And so thinking through that would be fascinating. And then Jeff, one you might actually be interested in, leadership in Star Trek, lessons from the captain's chair. and it looks at all the different Star Trek captains and sort of their leadership styles. So I'm always on the lookout for new resources for the science fiction class, and the leadership book is probably going to find its way in some form into the course next time I teach it. So
I probably need to buy a yellow shirt, right?
yeah, you do.
Yep,
Command
yep,
gold. Yes, that's
yep.
right. Yeah.
Need to have the yellow shirt. That's
That's right.
fantastic.
Hmm.
Steve, I mean, always, this is kind of like the conversations we have around the office. I just
Yeah.
always enjoy it, particularly hearing about your personal interests and your history. Thanks so much for sharing, for being part of the conversations with the president. Folks should check out our website, read more about your bio and your CVs there as well if they want to catch up on all of your different essays and writings and such. Thanks so much, and thanks for your service to Bethany. You and I are one of the longest running teams when it comes to president and an academic
Yes.
dean, and it's a partnership I greatly value. So thanks so much, Steve.
As do I. Thanks, Jeff.